Okay, good day everyone. So, welcome to this subject, the contemporary world. Again, I am your instructor, Miss Novi Di Balighot. So, before anything else, let me have a recap with our previous discussion. We have learned about the global cities, now which or where it is noted in that lesson that these global cities are sites and mediums of globalizations and where exciting fusions of cultures and ideas happens. And they are also places that generate tremendous wealth. However, these remain sites of great inequality. So this time we will move on with the topic global demography. So, in this lesson, you are expected to discuss the relationship between the population and the economic welfare, identify the effects of aging and overpopulation, and differentiate between contrasting positions over the reproductive health. So, this time, let us start our discussion with defining what is demography. So, demography comes from a Greek word, ancient Greek word demo, which means people, and graphy, which means writing or description or measurement. So, meaning to say, this demography is a statistical or a quantitative study of human population. So, especially about migration, aging, deaths, and mortality rates or the births. So, important terms in these lessons are human migration, fertility rate, mortality rate, and population aging. So, this human migration. It involves the movement of people from one place to another place with intentions of settling permanently or temporarily at a new location. And then the next is the fertility rate, or this is the average number of children that would be born to a woman over her lifetime. So the mortality rate, on the other hand, is the average number of deaths in a particular population. And then the aging or the population aging, this refers to the changes in the age composition of a population such that there is an increase in the proportion of the older person. Right, so before anything else, let us take a look at the population of each continent of the earth. So, we have 7 continents of the earth, and the most populous one is Asia with 4.64 billion inhabitants. And two of the most populated countries belong to this um, continent. So, what are those countries? So, those are China and the India, which together constitute about 36% of the world's population. So next, the second most populous continent is Africa, which has about 1.34 billion inhabitants, followed by Europe with 747 million inhabitants. And while Latin American and Caribbean region has 653 million, and the North America, consisting Canada and United States, has a population of 368 million, and that is 5% of the total population of the world. And also the Oceania, the least populated region, which has 42 million. And the seventh continent, which is the Antarctica, has a very small population, uh, where it has 1,200 people based mainly in polar science stations. Right. So, next is the fertility rate in 2020. All right. So the fertility rate of the world, according to the Population Reference Bureau, in 2020 was 2.448 births per woman. Huh? So in 2019, it declined into 0.41%. In 2018, it declined again into 0.41%. And in 2017, births per woman is 0.4% decline from 2017. So it means that the fertility of the world as time goes by was falling. Why? So it was said that it has nothing to do with the sperm counts of the usual things, uh, but instead it is driven by more women in education and work, as well as these women have a greater access to contraception, leading to some women choosing to have a fewer children. So the next is the what is this? So this is the life expectancy. No? So the life expectancy captures the mortality along the entire life course. So it tells us the average um, age of death in a population. So according to the World Health Organization, the global average life expectancy is 71.4 years old as of 2015, and women have are living an average of 74 years and men approximately 69 years old. So these orange and yellow countries here in some part of African continent uh, has the lowest average of life expectancy with at least maybe 50 to 67. All right, 50 to 67 uh, years of age. So as well as in some part of Asian continent, right? So the blue one or the darker one, the blue one, these countries was said to be the countries with high life expectancy rate, right? So it was said that Hong Kong has the top one highest in terms of life expectancy in both sexes, followed by the country Japan, and then Macau, Switzerland, and also Singapore. So that's it. Right. Next is the top 10 most populous countries in the world. So as we all know, two of the most populous countries, China and India, the first and the second most populous countries according to national population clock is China and India, which comprises the 17.9% of the total world population. So that is 1,108,302,800, followed by India with 1.3 billion, and then the third most populous country is the United States. So followed by another Asian country, Indonesia, then Pakistan, American country, which is Brazil, African country, Nigeria, Asian country, the eighth one is Bangladesh, and then the Russia, and then followed by the Mexico. So approximately these 10 countries, no, comprises 4.45 billion people, representing around 57% of the world's population as of 2020. So almost half, no, more than half of the total population of the world came from these 10 countries. All right. So overall, according to the World Population Clock, people in the world as of 2020 are already 7.8 billion, no? And it was estimated last March 2020. So the world population has experienced continuous growth following the Great Famine in 1315 to 1317, and then the end of the Black Death in 1350. And the highest global population growth rates increases over 1.8% occurred between 1955 to 1975. So that was after the World Wars. And then it is projected to decline further in the course of the 21st century. So the global population is still increasing, but there is a significant uncertainty about its long-term trajectory due to the changing rates of fertility and the mortality. And then the United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs projects between 9 to 10 billion people by 2050. That is 80% confidence interval of 10 to 12 billion by the end of the 21st century. So other demographers also predict that this world population will begin to decline in the second half of the 21st century. So why do we need to study this number of people, births, aging, deaths, migration? So why do we need to study demography? So this topic, demography, is a mandated topic from the Commission on Higher Education. Aside from that, at its core, it will go back to one of the basic questions in the social sciences. That is, why or how do people interact with their surroundings? So these interactions you will see are increasingly molded by the globalization process, which we discussed in our previous lesson. So in this unit, no, we will explain and understand the interconnectedness among the population, the migration, and also the environmental sustainability. Right. So let us start with um, one of the basic unit of the society. So what was that? So of course the family. So the family where the quantitative study of human population always started. So the number of children. We will be talking about the number of children for each family. So in every parents having a child, they will think of, will the child be an economic asset or a burden to a family, or um, urban and rural families has a different perspective or thoughts on in terms of how many children they would have. So let's take a look at the urbanized parents. So urbanized parents, so those parents who live in urban places, like cities. No? So it was said that these parents are educated and professionals. And some or most of these parents just desire one or two child. No? So because each partner tied down or committed to their perspective work or profession. So neither has they have the time to devote to having a kid, much more to parenting. So these urban parents, urban families, have their sights on long-term saving plans, and they set significant parts on their incomes to their retirement. Aside from that, healthcare and the future education of their child. So, on the other hand, the urban families, rural families, view that having many children or having a large kinship networks, or what we call extended families, no, or having two or more children, because couples live on their own. So, rural families, they take, for example, can take over they believe that their children can take over the agricultural work of their parents. So, their houses can also the retirement homes of their parents, who will then proceed to take care of their grandchildren. So, urban families, however, may not have the same kinship network, because couples live on their own, or because they move out from the farmlands. So, thus, it is usually the basic family unit that is left to deal with life challenges on its own. So, these differing versions of urban and rural families determine the economic and the social policies that each country's craft regarding their respective populations. So, countries in the less developed regions of the world, which rely to agricultural farming, tend to maintain high levels of population growth. So, however, these urban populations have grown, but we see urban places, populations like cities have grown, but not necessarily because families are having more children. So it is rather the combination of the natural outcome of significant migration of the people transferring from rural to urban areas, or from rural to the cities, because of economic opportunity, or some seek work in a modern sector of the society. And it was said that today, no, there were 191 million people live in countries other than their own. So we see this with our OFWs, no, or the migrant workers across the world. So this movement of people manifest in the developing countries, where industries and businesses in the cities attract people from rural areas. So this trend has been noticeable since 1950s. So by the start of the 21st century, the world had become 44% urban. So today, as what I have said, there were already 191 million people live in countries other than their own. So some live permanently or temporarily because of work. Right. So countries welcome these immigrants. So why? So because according to some countries, the reason why they accept this immigrant is to offset the debilitating effects of an aging population. On the other hand, these immigrants are perceived as a threat to job market, because they compete against the citizens for jobs, and often they have the edge because they are open to receiving even lower wages. All right. So here we have the country scored with um, 8.46, indicating that these Canadian are the most welcoming people in the world when it comes to my immigration. So immigration is, again, it is a movement of people from their home countries with specific factors, which is to, of course, like our OFWs, they desire to obtain higher wage rate, no? Improve the standard of living, have job opportunities, gain education, and others also, other reason or non-economic factors like leaving their country because of persecution, ethnic cleansing, genocide, war, natural disasters, and the like. So Canada, over the next decade, experienced a steep increase in a retirement rate. So, which Atune said creates several foreseeable changes. For one thing, as people age and stop working, having highest number of older people, no? For one thing, people age and stop working, they no longer contribute as much to the healthcare system, yet their healthcare expenses during these years are likely to increase. So the big challenge of the Canada, for example, is that the labor force, their labor force is out of balance. So during the next 2 decades, 13.4 million people are projected to exit the workforce, no? But only 11.8 million people will finish school and join the workforce, and maybe we can get a few more youths, young people participating at higher rate in the workforce, and essentially to hire new workers. This is a challenge for some employers and businesses looking to invest in Canada and essentially to grow their economy. So, in the continent also of Europe, for example, their immigrants help them to rebuild and repopulate Europe after World War II. And in Japan, example, Japan has a strict immigration policy in 1990s. However, issues such as low birth rates and aging workforce caused the country to reevaluate its law. So that's it. Um, what are the perils of overpopulation? What are the risks of having an overpopulation? So there are lots of studies and research that gives us a negative effect, no, about having an overpopulated world. So specifically economic factors. So economic factors that contributes to the immigration, including the desire to um, obtain higher wages, improve the standard of living, have a better job opportunities, and gain an education in urban places. No? However, some development planners see this urbanization and industrialization as indicators of a developing country. So they disagree on the role of population growth or the decline in modernization. So this lengthy discussion brings back the ideas of, if you have remember, the British scholar Thomas Malthus, no, where he warned in his 1798 essay on the principle of population that he believes that population or overpopulation will inevitably exhaust the world supply in the middle of the 19th century. And it was revived by um, biologist Paul Ehrlich and his wife Anne, who wrote then a book which is entitled The Population Bomb, which this book argued that overpopulation in 1970s to 1980s will bring about global environmental disasters. So those were the perils of overpopulation. And in turn, this would lead to food shortage and mass starvation. So these scholars propose that countries like the United States will or should take a lead in the promotion of global population control in order to reduce the growth rate to zero. So, their recommendation range from the bizarre chemical castration to the policy oriented, like taxing an additional child and luxury taxes on child related products, to monetary incentives, like, for example, paying off men who would agree to be sterilized after having two children, to institution building, a powerful Department of Population and Environment. So, those were the recommendations after having those uh, essays, no, and a book written by some of the scholars about the perils of the overpopulation. So they fear that this overpopulation will exhaust the food supply, no, and um, brings masturbation and global disasters. And that's the reason why there are mga policies being created for each countries to mitigate or to stop overpopulation. So, is our planet overpopulated? Really? Is it overpopulated? So, there was some reason for this fear to persist. So, the rate of global population increase was its highest after the World War. So when nations finally able to return to its normal after the devastations of the World War I and World War II. So by limiting the population, vital resources could be used for economic progress and not be diverted and wasted to feeding more mouths. So this argument became the basis for each country, or each government of each country, population to create a population control programs across the world. So, for example, the Philippines, the China, and India sought, no, Philippines, in China, and in India, they sought to lower the birth rates on the belief that unless controlled, the free expansion family members would lead to a crisis in resources, which in turn may result in widespread poverty, mass hunger, and political instability. So, but did you know that in early 1958, after the World War, no, the American policy journal Foreign Affairs had already advocated contraceptions and sterilization as a practical solution to global economic and social and political problem in America. So it already started in 1958. No? So in USA, so in 1970, the Title X of the Public Health Service Act provide access to contraceptive services, supplies, and this information to those in need. So priority for these services is given to people with low income. That is why it is called Title X. No, means X given to people with low income. Alright. Alright. So this program is administered through the Office of the Population Affairs under the Office of Public Health and Science. So the vital resource of the funding is for family planning, clinics throughout the nation which provide reproductive health care, including abortion. So in 1970s, the U.S. Congress established the Commission on Population Growth and American Future, which was created to provide recommendations regarding the population growth and its social consequences. So the commission submitted its final recommendations in 1972, which included promoting contraceptives and liberalizing abortion regulation. So that is in USA. So on the other hand, ah, for a while, right? In Uzbekistan, no, in Uzbekistan, there is a compulsory sterilization, and it is reported that Uzbekistan has been pursuing a policy of forced sterilization, hysterectomies, and IUD insertion since the late 1990s in order to impose population nanning. So in China, you have remembered, they are famous of this since they are the top one most populous country. If you have remembered previous years, they implemented a one child policy, which started in 1979 to 2015. So we all know that one child policy in China, um, the most significant population planning system was China's one child policy. Having more than one child was discouraged in this country, and unauthorized births were punished by giving fines. And there were also allegations of illegal forced abortions and forced sterilization in this country. So, the Chinese government introduced this policy to alleviate the social and environmental problem in China. So, the policy has been controversial both within and outside China because of its manner of implementation and because of the concerns about the negative economic and social consequences. Example, the female infanticide. So, in Oriental cultures, the oldest male child has the responsibility of caring the parents in their age, and therefore it is common for Oriental families to invest most heavily in the oldest male child, such as providing college, steering them into the most lucrative careers, and so on. So to these families, having a male child is a paramount. So in that policy, one child policy, a daughter has no economic benefit. So the daughter, especially as a first child, is often targeted for abortion or infanticide. So China introduced several government reforms to increase retirement payments to coincide with the one child policy during the time where couples could request permission to have more than one child. So, however, in 2016, the Chinese government finally allowed two children per couple, a policy that changed that a policy change that did little to arrest the rapid fall in population growth. So the Chinese government allowed its people to conceive a second child under the supervision of government regulation. So advocates, while there are while there have been criticisms that challenge this argument, like overpopulation brings perils, it persists even to this very day. No? Like in May 2009, a group of American billionaires warned on how nightmarish explosion of people was a potentially disastrous environmental, social, industrial threat to the world. So this worry is likewise at the core of the economist in argument for the promotion of the reproductive health. So, advocates of population control contend for universal access to reproductive technologies such as condoms, pill, abortion, and vasectomy, and more importantly, um, giving the women the right to choose whether to have children or not. So is it the economy? It is the economy, not the babies. No? So the use of population control to prevent economic crisis has its critique. So, for example, Betsy Hartman disagree with advocate of the Malthusian theory and accused that government are just using population control as a substitute for social justice and much needed reforms such land distribution, employment creation, provision of mass education and healthcare and emancipation. So other critics pointed out that the population did grow fast in many countries in 1960s, and this growth aided the development by spurring technological and institutional innovation and increasing the supply of human ingenuity, and acknowledged the shift in population from the rural to urban areas from 52% to 75% in the developing world since 1950s. So they likewise noted that these mega cities or global cities are now clusters in which income disparities along with transportation, housing, air pollution, and waste management are major problems, and they also become and continue to be the center of economic growth and activity, right? So this, on the other hand, the baby boomers generation is often shortened to term boomers. So who are this generation? The boomers generation. So boomers are the demographic cohort following the silent generation and preceding the generation X. So the generation is this generation is defined as those people who were born from 1946 to 1964. So during the post World War II baby boom. So the term is also used outside the United States, but the dates, the demographic context, and the cultural identifiers may vary, and the baby boom has been described variously as a shock wave and as the pig in the python. So these baby boomers are often parents of the Generation X and the millennials. So like us, so we are the millennials, no? The productive capacities of these generations are especially high in the regions like the East Asia. So it was said, so these baby boomers now are older, the people who were born between 1946 to 1964. So they are old now, and it was said that this generation was responsible for the economic growth during of the period of demographic shift after the World War, and one third of this baby boom, no, are responsible for the economic development for example, in East Asia, right? So they made up also the productive megacities of or from the different regions of the world, right? So this population growth has in fact spurred technological and institutional innovation. So, and increased in the supply of human ingenuity, advances in agricultural productions have shown that the Malthusian nightmare can be prevented. So the Green Revolution, for example, created high-yielding varieties of rice and cereals, along with the development of the new methods of cultivation, increased yields globally, but more particularly in the developing world. So that is why it was said that it's the economy and not the babies, not the overpopulation, because others believe that this population growth has spurred technological and institutional innovation and also prevented the nightmare of the Malthusian theory. Now, so the global famine that Malthushan predicted did not happen. So in 1950 and 1984, the grain production increased, allowing agriculture to keep pace with population growth. So thereby keeping the global famine under control. So lately, a middle ground emerged between these two extremes that scholars and policymakers agree with the new Malthusian but suggest that government pursue population programs. They must include more inclusive growth and greener economic growth. So how about the women? No? How about the women and the reproductive rights? So, after hearing about the perils and the pros and the cons of overpopulation, according to some of the scholars, no, so the character in the middle of these debates, who are they? Of course, the women, who were the subject of these population measures. So, the reproductive rights supporters then argue that if this population control and economic development were to reach their goals, women must have control over whether they will have children or not. And when they will have their children, if any, government give to women this power. They will be able to pursue their vocations by their economic, social, and political, and contribute to the economic growth. So, this correlation between fertility, family, and fortune or wealth has motivated the countries with growing economies to introduce or strengthen their reproductive health laws, including abortion. So, high income or the first world countries or nations and fast developing countries are said to be able to sustain the growth in part because women were given the power to choose and easy access to reproductive technologies. So, like in North America and Europe, 73% of the governments allow abortion upon mother's request. So, moreover, more educated a woman is, the better are her prospects of improving her economic position. So women can spend most of the time pursuing either their higher education or their careers instead of forcibly reducing this time to take care of their children, right? So most of the countries implement reproductive health laws because they worry about the health of the mother. So in 1960, for example, in Bolivia, the average fertility rate was 6.7. So that is 6 to 7 children. So in 1978, the Bolivian government put into effect a family planning program that include legalization of abortion. So after noticing a spike in unsafe abortion and maternal death, a similar pattern occurred in Ghana. So after the government expanded the reproductive health laws out of the same concern as that of the Bolivian government, as a result, fertility declined steeply and continued to decline later. So thus in 2014, United Nations reported that proportion of countries allowing abortion to preserve the physical health of a woman increased from 63% to 0%, 63% to 70%, and those to preserve the mental health of a woman increased from 52% to 67%. So is it all right? However, opponents or critics regard these reproductive rights as nothing but a false front of abortion. Some contend that this method of preventing conceptions endangers the life of the mother and the child. So it should be or it must be banned. So the religious wing of the anti-reproductive rights flank goes further and describes abortion, no, as a debauchery that sullies the name of God, and it will send the mother to hell and prevents her soul, no, the baby to become a human. So this position was political powerful, one partly because various part of the developing world remained very conservative, like our country, Philippines, right? So how about let's take a look at the feminist perspective. So the feminist approach to the issue about reproductive rights from the other angle. So the feminists argued, or they are against in any population control because they are compulsory by nature, resorting to a carrot and stick approach, punitive mechanism coexist alongside benefits that actually does not empower the women. So these feminists believe that the government assumption that poverty and environmental degradation are caused by overpopulations are very wrong. So that idea is wrong. That environmental degradation are caused by overpopulation is a wrong notion. So according to the feminist perspective, so these factors ignore other equally important causes like unequal distribution. How about unequal distribution of wealth? The lack of public safety nets like the universal health care, lack of education and gender equality programs of the government. So feminists also point out that there is very little evidence that point to overpopulation as a culprit behind poverty and ecological devastation or environmental degradation. So with this, one of the goal of the United Nations in 1994, the United Nations Conference on Population and Development suggested that country representatives to that conference agreed that women should receive a family planning counseling on abortion, the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases, the nature of human sexuality, and the main elements of responsible parenthood. So, however, the conference also left it to the individual countries to determine how these recommendations can be turned into programs. So, hence, globally, women and feminists are on productive rights are acknowledged, but the struggle to turn them into policy still fought in the national level or in each country. So that dilemma, the dilemma that women and feminist movement still faces today. Right. So today, um, this population growth has already reached 7.8 billion and it is estimated to increase 9.5 billion in 2050 and 11.2 billion in 2100. So the median age of the population today were more on 30 years old with female, 30.1 years old with females, median age at 29 years old. And today's global population, 95% of this population growth usually happen in the developing countries. No? The opposite is happening in the developed countries where population remains steady but declining in some of the most advanced countries. So it is declining like in Japan and in Singapore. So however, this scenario is not a runoff that we could get out of control. Of demographers predict that the world population, no, will stabilize by 2050 to 9 billion, although they warn that feeding this population will be a challenge. So the decline in fertility and the existence of a young productive population, however, may not be enough to offset the concern of food security. So it was said that is why the FAO, or the Food and Agriculture Organization, warned that in order for countries to mitigate the impact of overpopulation or population growth, food production must increase by 70%, and annual cereal production must rise to 3 billion tons from the current 2.1 billion, and the meat production must also go up, to mitigate the impact of population growth. So therefore, the FAO recommends that the countries must increase their investments in agriculture, to feed the overpopulated countries. Craft also a long-term policies aimed at fighting poverty. So that is why there are mga laws, to offset overpopulation or population control, and long-term policies aimed at fighting poverty. I mean, so like here in the Philippines, we have these 4 Ps, to help those poor people who are in need, no, and to also lessen the poverty in our country. And aside from that, invest in some of the research and development. So the United Nations body also suggests that countries must develop a comprehensive social service program that includes food assistance, consistent delivery of health services, and education, especially for the poor. Domestic production, which is not enough, and food production is essential import of a nation. So the Food and Drugs therefore enjoins the government to keep their markets open and to eventually move towards a global trading system that is fair and competitive, and that contributes a dependable market for food. To the aforementioned are worthy recommendation, but states shall need the political to push through these swift changes in population growth and security. So this will sometime also happen given to good governance is also, uh, especially in the developing world, have yet to attain. So those were the recommendations to feed the overpopulated world, or to offset the population growth. So in conclusion, this demography is a complex discipline that requires the integration of various scientific data. So as you have seen, there are demographic changes, policies which have impacts on environments, on politics and resources, and others. Yet, at its core, demography accounts for the growth and the decline of human species. And it may be about the large number and massive effects, but it is ultimately about the people. So, thus, no interdisciplinary account of globalization is complete without accounting of the people. So, in our next lesson, we will continue to this theme of examining people, and will focus on the global movement of these uh, people. So, that is the global migration. So, we will identify what are the reasons why these people move from one place, or from one place to another place, temporarily or permanently, and explain why some of the countries regulate migration, and what is we will be discussing about the effects of this global migration, no, on the well-being of its country or in its state. So that would be all for this lesson. So see you in the next discussion. Have a good day, everyone.